Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mia Spiegelman. I'm the VP of Regulatory Quality and Environmental Affairs at Medtech Canada. Welcome to our webinar from today. It's called Challenges and Strategies for Conducting Medical Device Trials in Canada. Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge that we are in traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuits, and Métis peoples. In consideration of the fact that we are participants from this webinar from across the country and beyond it, I would like to acknowledge that the land we are gathered on today is in traditional territories of many diverse Indigenous people of Canada. We gather today in the spirit of reconciliation, appreciation, and collaboration. So before we introduce the speakers from today, a couple of housekeeping items. So there is a Q&A button or section for you to put in your questions throughout the webinar. Because we expect quite a lot of attendees, what we have done is we put the microphone and the video on mute. And so at the end of the session of the webinar, if you have questions, number one, you can put your Q&As in the chat, but not in the chat, in the Q&A button, but also you can raise your hand, and then based on the order, we will unmute you and then you can present your question. Please note that we will be recording the webinar event today, and we will be sharing the recording along with a copy of the presentation to all the attendees. Because unlike our usual webinars, we have MedTech and non-MedTech members, we will probably need to take a bit more time in figuring out how to do that. But again, we will be working towards sharing the recording and definitely the presentations. So now with that, I want to introduce our speakers. We have two really great speakers today. We have Vatche he's the co-owner of president of Vantage BioTrials, a Canadian CRO specializing in clinical operations, delivery for pharmaceuticals and medical device sponsors. Vatche has over 27 years of experience in his field. And of course, Marie-Claude Gravel, she's the co-owner and co-chief executive and COO at SPharm Inc. It's a Canadian consulting firm specializing in regulatory affairs for health products. She comes to us with over 20 years of experience in our field. I will hand over now the presentation to our speakers, and I hope you enjoy Medtech Canada webinar today. So Vatche and Marie-Claude, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mia, and welcome everybody. And as Mia mentioned, we are the co-presenters today. Both our organizations have worked together in the past in collaboration with medical device manufacturer sponsors to conduct clinical trials. And we will start off with some of the discussion points for today. So Marie-Claude is going to go over some of the key regulatory challenges in securing what we call an ITA, Investigational Testing Authorization, to commence a clinical trial. She's also going to go over all the strategies to accelerate approvals and minimize delays. Myself, I'll go over best practices for managing CROs, such as Vantage BioTrials, and especially multi-site clinical trial sites, and insights on logistics, compliance, and staff readiness. And of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A and open discussion, and we will definitely try to keep within the 1 hour time window. I know that it's during lunchtime for most, so we'll try to keep that in mind. So Marie-Claude.
Thank you, Vatche. Mia, can you go to the slide 4, please? Yeah, thank you. So the purpose of this regulatory segment is really to provide a high-level overview of the investigational testing authorization requirements, highlight the technical and procedural challenges faced by sponsors, and discuss potential solutions to support a more predictable and efficient review pathway. Next slide, please. Understand the medical device classification and foundational as ITA requirements are determined by device risk class. In Canada, devices are categorized into 4 classes. Class 1 includes syringe tips, nasopharyngeal catheters, GISO, clamps. Class 2 nebulizers, syringes, electric toothbrushes. Class 3 external defibrillator, bone densitometer, radiographic units. Class 4 dermal implant, embolic implant. Health Canada has issued a guidance entitled keywords index to assist manufacturer in verifying the class of medical devices, which is a very helpful resource for quickly identifying device classification. Alternatively, the standard guidance on risk classifications include additional information and tools to help sponsors to classify their device. By comparison, the United States uses a three-class system, where the Class 3 englobe Canadian Class 3 and all of Class 4 devices. In Europe, they have also three-class category, where the Class 2B equivalent to Health Canada Class 3 devices. These differences pose challenging for global clinical development, requiring sponsors to reconcile classification and regulatory expectation across jurisdictions. Additionally, some products classified as medical devices in Europe may be considered as natural product in Canada based on our regulations, which can pose an additional set of challenges, including the GMP requirement for those type of products. Next slide, please. Under the Canadian regulation, an ITA is required for the investigational testing of unlicensed Class 3, 3, and 4 devices, as well as for the licensed devices that are being studied for a new indication initiated by the manufacturer of the device. Conversely, certain studies are not eligible, or for which an ITA is not required at all, such as those conducted solely at the manufacturing site without sales. Sale definitions include offer for sale, expose for sale, have in possession for sale, and distribute, whether or not the distribution is made for consideration. So the definition is broad in scope and includes dispensing of device to a Canadian clinical sites. Are also excluded to the requirement to submit an ITA clinical sponsor investigation of licensed devices, which are not initiated by the manufacturer. If it's for a new indication, this is considered as off-label use and only required the obtention of the REB approval. It also worth noting that specific category, such as whip pulse sequences for magnetic resonance imaging device, are exempted to the ITA requirement. Next slide, please. So the content of an ITA submission vary according to the device class. For all class of devices, administrative information, manufacturer and importer information, device identification, indication for use are required. As part of the administrative information, this includes application form, table of contents, cover letter, etc. For Class 3 and 4 devices, we must, in addition, provide device description, design philosophy, and marketing history. Next slide, please. Risk assessment, according to ISO 14971, is required to be submitted for all Class 3 and 4 devices when the declaration of conformity is normally considered sufficient for Class 2. Previous studies and institutional information, all the clinical requirement, protocol, investigator brochure, and form consent form instruction for use are required also for all class of devices. In addition, alternate treatment and REB approval must be submitted at the time of the submission for Class 3 and 4. Next slide, please. And finally, device labeling is required for all type of devices with specific requirement for Canada. An investigator agreement along with resume must be submitted for Class 3 and 4 devices. Next slide, please.
Marie-Claude, sorry.
Yeah.
Which slide are you seeing on your screen right now?
10.
Okay, because the one I'm seeing is slide 11. And that's why I was wondering if we were a bit off.
I am at the technical challenges.
And I'm showing the one after. Mia, are you seeing the same?
I have slide 10 as technical challenges. So Marie-Claude, are you looking at the screen that I'm sharing?
Yeah.
So in the yeah.
Okay, 1 second. Got it. Okay, it was because it wasn't being synced on my end.
Oh,
Okay.
no worries.
Sorry about that, everybody.
That's okay.
No
Go ahead.
problem.
Talking about technical challenges.
There's always
That's
some
my bad.
IT topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. No
Sorry,
problem.
Marie-Claude. Okay, we're good.
Thank you, Vatche. So despite a well-defined regulatory framework, sponsors frequently encounter challenges during the ITA process. One significant challenge is the requirement to identify at least one investigator in site at the time of the submission. This often delays filing as compared to drug study under a CTA, where site and investigator details have to be submitted separately through a clinical trial site information form once the protocol is ready for implementation at a specific site and RUB approval received. Another issue is really the lack of comprehensive guidance. For example, there is limited clarity on the minimum prior study requirement needed before initiating a first-in-human trial. While standards of ISO, CSA, and ASTM are very helpful on the technical development, not all are formally recognized by Health Canada. This gap becomes more complex with new device type for which no established guidance or standard exists. Similarly, combination products face ambiguity. Current ITA guidance specifies that for drug-biologic device combination, submission must be made to the lead directorate depending on the principal mechanism of action. However, if the Medical Device Bureau is identified as the lead, there is no clear guidance on the medical device website of what level of information is required regarding the drug component, where or when in which section this information must be submitted. Contrary to the drugs, where it's really clear in which section medical device information regarding a combination product must be provided. Discrepancy also exists between Health Canada written guidance and the ITA application form. For instance, the guidance states that device description and design philosophy are not required for Class 2 devices, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago. Yet the application form includes this requirement. Similarly, although the guidance indicates that the declaration of conformity is sufficient for the risk assessment of Class 2 devices, sponsors are often asked to provide a full risk assessment instead during the review process. Differences in device classification across the jurisdiction add further complexity to multinational clinical programs. For example, a dynanometer is classified as a Class 1 device in the US, but as Class 1 in Canada. Sponsors believe that it's a Class 1, we don't need to submit an ITA. No, you need to submit one in Canada. So if the sponsor wish to use the same device across all sites, they will need to, for the manufacturer of the device, not the sponsor of the study, to submit either an ITA to Health Canada or obtain an MDSAP certificate and pursue the medical device license application pathway, which is also a long process. And the use of medical devices within drug study introduce additional challenges. Often protocols are designed primarily for the drug, with devices mentioned only peripherally or sometimes not at all. Despite the sponsor must follow the same ITA process, is the device were central in the study. This leads to the submission of clinical documents that are not directly relevant and even require a clinical study report despite the device's performance are not being evaluated at all in the trial. Another concern is the discrepancy in review timeline between the drug and device application. While CTA for drug are subject to a 30-day default review period, ITA review can take several months due to differences in the process. In absence of a default review period coupled with multiple rounds of queries that reset the review slot further complicates the timelines. For example, sponsor may receive an initial set of form-related questions. Sponsor submit the response. Then after 15 days, they receive another set of form-related questions. They provide a response. They receive another set of screening clarification requests regarding the labeling because the screening is not performed at all incomplete before the submission of the request. And this, you can pass 2-3 weeks or months before that the review commences. Finally, the ITA submission process itself poses predictability and some security challenge. Sensitive data must be submitted via unsecure email, while attachment is limited to 20 megabytes. So sponsors often need to split files across multiple emails without a rapid confirmation that all parts were received on time. And then if courier submission is technically an option, in practice, packages are not always be received promptly at a medical device bureau, as Health Canada also work remotely. So this leads to delays, or in some cases, the courier is returned to the sponsor. Next slides, please. So several measures could strengthen the IT framework and really reduce the regulatory burden for both sponsor and also regulator. First, establishing a detailed Health Canada guidance across device categories would enhance consistency and transparency. Exploring the development of common requirements across jurisdiction, similar to the International Council of Harmonization framework for drugs. I believe this could be very beneficial for all parties. At present, aside from the technical standards and ISO 14175, which is the good clinical practice for medical devices, there is really limited international harmonization. Second, it could be to expand reviewer capacity by hiring more reviewers with appropriate expertise would enable to more timely and highly quality review. Consideration could also be given to removing the requirement for ITA submission for auxiliary material, such as the nanometer discussed a bit earlier, that are already approved and marketed in other jurisdictions, particularly when another division of Health Canada has already reviewed and approved the dossier. Third, adopting the default review period will significantly improve predictability for both sponsor and reviewers. Currently, sponsors are giving 60 days to respond requests for additional information. This extended timeline makes it difficult for reviewers to know when they can anticipate to receive the response and plan their workload efficiently on their hand. So shortening the sponsor response timeline to maybe 2 and 5 days could maybe to help streamline the planning and ensure review are conducted with predictable and acceptable timeline for both parties. It is also essential for sponsors to collaborate with clinical, technical, and regulatory experts to ensure that all aspects of the medical device and study remain fully compliant. Such collaboration not only streamlines the review process, but also enhances the predictability and efficiency of the overall regulatory pathway. In conclusion, the IT process is a critical mechanism to enabling an investigational use of medical devices in Canada. While the framework is relatively robust, challenges discussed before remains, particularly in respect to the clarity of requirement, predictability of timelines, and harmonization with the international regulatory system. Through the implementation of clearer guidance, increases reviewer capacity, standardized timeline, and multi-stakeholder collaboration, the IT process can be strengthened to better support innovation while ensuring patient safety and regulatory compliance. So thank you for your attention, and Vatche, the floor is not yours.
Well, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. So sorry about that, Mia. Yeah. I'm having all kinds of technical issues today. So thank you, Marie-Claude. It was a great presentation, especially on the regulatory side, for the challenges and hopefully solutions that will come up in the near future. Definitely Canada does have some challenges, but we are striving to fix some of those. And in the meantime, we do urge a lot of sponsors, especially on the service provider side, when we go out and speak about device trials in Canada, there is a lot of the concepts out there that, oh, Canada just takes too long. But we have also seen some really great success stories where when working with the proper kind of partners and experts within the field that really know the environment here in Canada and how it works in terms of the regulatory, but also the clinical aspects, the investigator sites, and the operational logistics, then we could actually speed up some of those trials where maybe some delays happen in the beginning. We could speed up the trial maybe in the middle or towards the end to also reach timelines. So having said that, I wanted to present more on the operational aspects of clinical trials. That's what we are more known for and are experts in, especially when it comes to looking at all the risks in a trial. And whenever I give any type of presentation on clinical operations, a lot of times this picture comes up, and I've seen it also in other presenters' image presentations as an image. It's basically called building a plane while flying it, and that's how pretty much anyone in clinical operations feels when they start a project and they're like, "Wow, there are so many moving parts." And we got to get things going, and all these roles and functions have to work together to make sure that the plane doesn't crash, right? It's a bit chaotic. I won't lie. It's very difficult. I don't always encourage people to go into clinical operations if they don't have the heart for it, because it is a lot of dedication and effort. Next slide. However, I want to flip that on its head a little bit and challenge people to think of it as building a home from the ground up instead. So as many people know, building a house from the ground up involves a series of critical stages, from initial preparation and design to final inspection and all the interior finishes that have to be put in place. And the whole process requires a lot of careful planning, a very clear budget, and coordination with qualified professionals. Next slide. Now, of course, failure to plan is planning to fail. We all know that idiom. And I wanted to just point out certain barriers for device trials, especially in Canada, but going also looking at the global aspect of what's going on in this day and age, and why are these barriers happening, and how can we minimize those as well. So there's definitely regulatory agencies all throughout the world that are facing staffing cuts, but especially with the FDA, but also at Health Canada. Health Canada already has limited resources when it comes to their medical device bureau and the reviewers that are there. So as a manufacturer, as a sponsor, you need to keep that in mind when coming to Canada to do your device trials. Already at that point in time, in what Marie-Claude was explaining as well, just expect some delays to occur. But of course, again, if we know in advance what your plans are, we can get pre-ITA meetings put in place, have early discussions with Health Canada, and kind of give them a heads up that, okay, this is coming down the pipeline. We will be submitting for an ITA application, so they can also prepare their resources accordingly as well. Now, of course, not to get political, but we do have looming tariffs and tariffs already in place, which definitely will affect profit margins for manufacturers of devices in the healthcare field. So as a company, you have to think about that. You have to also think about how those tariffs are going to impact if you have to import your devices into Canada for the testing on Canadian patients. Another one, talking about importation, is the regulatory licensing and import hurdles. And here, I would highly recommend that you, for example, again, as a manufacturer, make sure that you hire, there are certain organizations out there that are experts, basically, at ensuring that the whole process, cold chain, and delivery and importation process is handled properly, with customs, with Health Canada, making sure all the labeling is up to par. So that's another hurdle that we need to think of. Funding instability and resource constraints are always there, especially again in this day and age. Another thing that we have noticed in Canada over the years is this fragmented ethics, contract, and review framework. So, we are one nation, but 12 provinces, and there's pretty much a dozen ways to do things in each province itself. So ethics reviews can take a long time. Contract negotiations with sites can also take a long time, and the review framework in each province is a bit different. However, the good news is, again, certain provinces like Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia have been working hard over the past 5 to 10 years to streamline, at least on the ethics side, the ethics review process. So we have Clinical Trials Ontario. In Ontario, we have Catalyst in Quebec, for example, Life Sciences BC in British Columbia. They're all working to make sure that this process is more streamlined, and you can issue a IRB of record, for example, if it's a multi-site trial within the province, and then the review time, instead of taking 5-6 months for an ethics board to finally approve your project to move forward, it could take maybe up to a month instead. So definitely there has been a lot of progress on that end, and we've seen metrics come out of those organizations that show some good advancement. Now, another one that's pretty big and not often thought about, but it is a reality, is the diminishing of public trust in device and pharmaceutical sectors. And it's not really just pharma, it's also in the device section as well. And what that leads to is recruitment challenges for your clinical trials with regards to participants and patients. So we got to think about that as well. Now, once your device is approved, so that's the end of the story there, there's still something else called the health technology assessment and reimbursement uncertainty that is out there, especially in Canada. Canada is one of the lowest ranking G7 nations, unfortunately, right now, that, once a drug or device is approved by the regulator, it takes a lot more time for it to be actually available to participants through the reimbursement pathways, the different reimbursement pathways, the public payers, et cetera, insurance companies. So we have a lot of thinking to do there in terms of that. And again, there are organizations that are trying to move that along. So hopefully the next time we speak to everyone on this call or in the future, we will see some progress there as well. But again, as a manufacturer, you have to think about, well, when I'm designing the study, what would health technology assessors in the future want to see in terms of data? So sometimes they would like real world data as well. Do I just do one clinical trial, submit, get approval from the regulator, and then assume that it's going to be perfectly okay for the health technology assessors? Not necessarily. They might want you to do maybe one more study, more in the real world setting, in order to get that kind of data to them. And then they usually, if the data is good, they usually go ahead and approve for certain provinces and types of payments, etc. And then Marie-Claude also alluded to data infrastructure. Well, there's not just the issue of data infrastructure at Health Canada, but we also need to think of data infrastructure and standardization limitations across the board when conducting a study. We use these days pretty much no paper. At our organization, we're all virtual, all digital as well. So really, we have minimized any use of paper. The same goes for a lot of clinical sites out there, especially in the US, but Canada is catching up. Whenever our clinical monitors go on site, now they can access everything online in the the patient's portals, sorry. And yeah, the need for paper, even the binders and stuff like that that we used to be looking at for regulatory documents, essential documents, are really kind of disappearing. And now we're working in electronic trial master file templates and things like that. You just have to make sure that all of this, whatever you're working in digitally, and all the data that's flowing is secure, is private, and even anonymized, and follows regulation and guidelines as well. Next slide. So how do we de-risk a trial at every stage to gain a competitive advantage as a manufacturer or a sponsor? First, we need to think of some of the major points of failure. So these days, timelines in clinical trials are a lot more variable, and enrollment is a lot more competitive. You might think that your product is, super unique, super special, and it definitely might be, but there could be still other products out there that are similar or older generation that patients are just used to using. So why would they even go on a trial to use something that is not proven? So there's that kind of a competition going on. And competition could sometimes be from other products that are very similar, and even they are doing clinical trials, and you might not know of initially. So it's really important to know the market and to make sure that your competitors when they're doing their studies, and it's not going to compete at the same time for the same patient population as you are. Regulatory approvals also depend more and more on certain nuances like site performance, the quality of the data that's coming through, and even geographic or population diversity. Especially in Canada, we have great diversity here, so that's a great thing for us. But as a manufacturer, you have to still think about, well, do I do the study in a dense, populated city where definitely there could be a lot of diversity? Or do I need to do it somewhere more rural, depending on the type of therapeutic area, if it's more on genetic disorders, rare diseases, etc., that's where you might need to go. So you have to really think about all these aspects. And again, don't forget about the competition out there. So you really need to have a thoughtful, nuanced approach to de-risk your asset and your trial. Oops, sorry about that. Oh, next slide, Mia. Thank you. So how do we minimize risks overall? We have, for many years now, been using a system of risk management and mitigation, and using certain different types of tools when we look at clinical operations. One of those tools is called a RACT, R-A-C-T for short, and it is basically a risk assessment categorization tool, a RACT. It allows you to categorize all the risks involved in a study, anything from the investigational product, the device, to safety aspects, to data management aspects, statistical analysis, the sites themselves, training, resources. It can go on and on. I mean, I've seen RACTs where there's potentially 24 different types of categories. And then what you need to do is identify risks for each of those categories, from minor to major. And once you've identified especially the major risks, you need to see how you can mitigate them. And all of this has to be documented. That's what regulators are expecting these days, especially with the updated guidance of ICH GCP E6 revision 3, as well as there's going to be some updates to the ISO guidance for GCPs as well. So please keep this in mind. You cannot just go into trial without having a very structured risk mitigation and management strategy. Once you have identified all the risks, you need a system to analyze the risks and, of course, monitor and control those risks. That's where, again, a CRO with experienced clinical monitors comes into play, and project managers. The PMs are usually the one that communicate with a feedback loop all the risks that do happen or could occur, and those that go from a minor to a major risk during the study. And again, remember that it's during the study. It's not just in the beginning that we do this risk assessment, but it has to be a continuous process, which is why risk review is very important. And just a minor thing, but very important thing, there's also what's called risk reporting, which is in the clinical study report at the end of the trial. There has to be a section where you show the regulators how you basically manage the risk of the trial and what were the results. And that is part of the mandatory requirements in the CSR. Next slide. Thank you. So having said that you have now mastered, let's say, how to minimize and mitigate risks, there is still that concept of speed in a clinical trial. Every time we as a CRO get a request for proposal to conduct a study on behalf of a manufacturer, the first thing we ask is, well, when are you expecting this to start? This meaning either site initiation, site identification, and even patient enrollment. And when a manufacturer comes to us and says, well, we think we have a pretty solid protocol, so you can work off of that and then give us a budget, and we need you to start in 2 months. We usually say, whoa, let's put on the brakes a little bit. That's very ambitious, and we need to make sure if it's achievable or not. And we go back and we speak to our teams. It could be our regulatory experts, such as SPharm. It could be our data management, biostats. It could be medical monitors. we go back to everyone in the team and ask questions about what they think about their protocol, the manufacturer's protocol, and see how we can make it doable in the timeline that the sponsor wants. And if we can't, we will push back, because speed versus precision is something that we always think about when we are launching a project. When you don't have speed, precision, the whole thing in terms of putting timelines on a project and trying to make it too ambitious, it just falls apart. Speed without precision is noise, and moving fast is good. But first, we have to make sure where we're headed. And if you're moving fast in the wrong direction, it really doesn't help. It actually hurts the project. So you need to ground forecasts in operational reality, informed by therapeutic expertise, such as the people around in your team, and historical benchmarks. So even look at different projects you've done in the past, whether you're a CRO or a manufacturer or sponsor, and see where have you gone wrong in the past and what you've done to fix things. And that could actually help you with the next project, of course. At the end, it's very important to note and to remember that timelines are both ambitious but achievable are one of the most strategic assets a sponsor can hold. So just make sure it's both ambitious and achievable. It has to be set in realistic expectations. Next slide. So once you have the infrastructure in place, actually, let me back up just one bit. So before infrastructure, I just want to talk about people, because clinical trials are driven by people. And Mia, if you can just click one more time on that slide, there's a bit of a animation. Thank you. So it's a fact that clinical trials are people driven. You have a product, but the trial itself is, I could say, you have about a dozen to 2 dozen different roles involved in making the trial happen. But it's really powered by infrastructure itself, and you can't have one without the other. Usually in this industry, we're very well versed in procuring qualified people. We're highly either experienced, or we come with a lot of masters or PhD degrees, or medical doctors or research nurses. So very qualified individuals, but many organizations fall short in executing an essential infrastructure for an upcoming project. As a CRO, we are often approached, especially by small sponsors, small manufacturers, because they just don't have any infrastructure. Sometimes some manufacturers that we've worked with are as small as, let's say, 4 or 5 people in the company. It could be a CFO, a CEO, a director of clinical, and an accountant, let's say, and that's it. So they really depend upon our expertise, where we have the infrastructure and we can put in place things like different vendors, the IT and data systems, regulatory like SPharm, for example, quality management systems, ClinOps, of course, and of course the sites, right? The sites are super important. Those are the places we're going to go where we're going to test your product with users. And I call them users because for devices, it could be patients, definitely, but sometimes the device could be tested on users such as healthcare practitioners who are going to be using the device on patients, and you need their feedback as well. So we have to keep that in mind and ensure that proper training and resources are in place at each site. Next slide. So what are some of the best practices working with CROs and, of course, multi-site trials? Again, there's a lot of competitive disease areas with limited patient pools out there these days, and multiple sponsors are vying for the same patients at the same sites. So as a sponsor, if you're on this call, you should be asking yourself, where does my trial rank in priority with these sites and with these CROs also? What does it take to be the, let's say, sponsor of choice or the first in line in their thought process? And we need to make sure that we prioritize things like clarity of communication with them, feasibility planning, and mutual respect. And I really highlighted that in red because sometimes we just, work through the day and we're so busy with what we're doing that we kind of forget that there are other people on the other end of that email you're sending where they're busy and they're handling maybe 20 plus projects, sometimes with the competitors that I spoke about before. So you need to make sure that you respect their time and acknowledge the hard work that they're doing. Now, what do sites do to prioritize trials? They do basically what we expect them to do, but they want from sponsors a well-run, supported, and strategically aligned concept for the trial. And their alignment has to be with their capabilities. So sites want to make sure that sponsors understand what their site's capabilities are in order for them to work together in a good way. Now, they deprioritize studies that appear risky, under-resourced, or operationally uncertain. So even sites might see that a sponsor, let's say, is using a CRO that has a lot of turnover with monitors, and the study is always under-resourced. Sites do not want to work with CROs or sponsors that are like that. So even us as a CRO, we challenge ourselves to make sure that our CRAs, our monitors, are happy, are paid well, are respected themselves, so that they stay within the project for the remainder of the project, whether it's 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, all depending on the length of the project. It's a challenge, but it's doable. And one tip I have is sites these days also really respect sponsors that bring their representatives to the table during the discussion of trial design. So if you are a manufacturer that is currently looking to launch a study, and you're thinking about your design process, speak to your CRO, see if they have any type of sites that they've worked with in the past that might be able to help and might be able to come to the table. Of course, on a consulting basis, sites do not want to do this for free. You have to pay them. That's part of the respect shown as well. Because in the past, and I've heard this from sites personally, they've had enough of doing pro bono work, and then the project just doesn't even come to them. And same for CROs as well. We are experts. We have people with 15, 20 plus years of experience working on projects. We need to make sure that the input we're giving is respected also. And at the same time, CROs, we value open communication and trust, of course. As a sponsor, make sure to actively seek and incorporate feedback and protocol design and study feasibility from your CRO. And of course, be a reliable and responsive partner with timely payments to CROs. You should also support CROs by avoiding micromanagement, providing necessary information for accurate budgeting and planning, and valuing their expertise and input throughout the trial's life cycle. Next slide. And just the last few slides, I wanted to consider a bit of logistics here as well. So on the aspect of importing and distribution, I had alluded to that before. Make sure you have an MDEL, a medical device establishment license. If importing or distributing the device in Canada, ensure your organization or the CRO holds the MDEL, unless it's exempt. And there are cases that it could be exempt. We could go maybe into that later on in the Q&A. Customs and import permits, work with the customs brokers experienced in Health Canada processes. Devices may require pre-clearance and should be labeled as investigational. And of course, storage and cold chain, devices requiring specific temperature and humidity controls, for example, active implants or diagnostic tools with reagents. They must be stored under validated conditions, and choose depots that have GMP or GDP compliance also. When we're talking about the logistics on the site side, or site readiness and training, ensure that the sites have appropriate infrastructure and equipment to use the device safely and per protocol. I think we were talking yesterday, Marie-Claude and I, and she mentioned an example of where a device was already on site, everything was ready to go. However, they did not have the proper sort of plug, I think you mentioned, Marie-Claude, right? It basically, it was useless. The device was useless. They just didn't think about, well, the current and how it's going to work at the site level, if they have the proper plugs in place, and it just put the study in jeopardy and timelines in jeopardy as well. So you have to think about the infrastructure that the site has, and is it compatible with the device that you're offering them for the study. Provide on-site or virtual training on device use as well, maintenance and troubleshooting. Documentation of training is often required by regulatory bodies and for audit readiness. I would even say not just often required, it's always required. In our industry, in clinical trials, document, document, document. That's what people say all the time. It is the golden rule. If it's not documented, it did not exist. We also say that as well. So make sure that there is an audit trail for everything, and especially for training. Next slide. And when it comes to labeling of your device and the packaging, devices must be labeled, of course, in both English and French in Canada per our bilingual requirements. And labels should indicate investigational use and not for sale, consistent with Health Canada's requirements for investigational testing. Next slide. When it comes to site readiness, we have to look at their training and SOP familiarities with protocol-specific procedures, of course, with GCPs, with the Health Canada-specific regulations and device regulations also. Proper use and troubleshooting of the device, that's really important. Once you have trained the site on your device, don't just assume that they're experts right away. Yes, they're trained, they might understand, but once they have to use that for the first time on a real patient as a user, things could happen. And if things happen, they need to know how to do the proper troubleshooting either themselves, if they can, or where to contact someone who's available 24/7 to do the troubleshooting with them. And remember, sometimes patients are seen on weekends as well. So you need to make sure that there is a line available for them to call even on weekends or in different time zones. Canada is big. We have several time zones, so make sure you consider that as well. Training must be documented. We already said that. So also try to select investigators and coordinators with prior experience in device trials, not just pharmaceutical ones. The device trials themselves have different monitoring needs and procedural demands. And maintain regular communication with sites to identify early challenges with device handling, data entry, or compliance. That communication aspect is key in all we do in clinical operations. Now, we always have to strike a good balance of communication between the sponsor CRO and the sites. Too much communication, sites will zone out. But just enough communication is what they're looking for. That could mean once a week you do a call or send an email just to check up on, hey, is everything going fine? I noticed that this week there were no enrollments. Have you screened anyone? What's the reason? If not, are you having any challenges with anything? And opening up that door to discussion is key and very important. And finally, device recall procedures. So in a clinical trial, it's super important, of course, to consider the safety aspects of studies when you monitor adverse effects or even adverse device effects and serious adverse effects. However, there could also be something called device recalls. And when that happens, what do you do? So have a proactive plan in place for device malfunction or recalls, and including traceability and notification protocols. Do not forget about that. Next slide. And finally, as a conclusion, we just wanted to highlight how to get to project success. It's usually a circular path, not a straight one, because it's a continuous process all throughout. You need to make sure you have early planning in place and think about your speed and your strategy, as we mentioned. Infrastructure, again, is very important. Forecasting, prioritization. What do we need to do first in order to make sure that the next goal is reached and the next step is done, and how to do it in the most or less risky way. So de-risking obstacles along the way, creating opportunities, and of course, continuous improvement. All of this together, you will win at your project. Next slide, and I think we are finished and we can open to questions and answers.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Vatche and Marie-Claude, for the presentation. I think it really provided a great overview around the clinical trials topic, and I did see some Q&As in the Q&A portion, so I'm going to read them out, and then, hopefully we can get some updates on the call, and if not, I'm sure that you'll be you have your contact information. They can share with you, contact you later. Okay, so will the slides be available? Yes, they will be. That was a question for me, I guess. So if a non-IVDD is labeled as research use only by the manufacturer, is an ITA required from an investigational initiative clinical trial that tests the effectiveness of the device?
The response is yes. So if to be tested in human, the device is not approved in Canada, it's not a licensed device, you need to submit an ITA to Health Canada and obtain approval and REB approval prior to initiate a trial.
Thank you. How do you see the impact of good statistical practices in order to de-risk trials? For example, experimental design, statistical plans, etc. This came from Natalie Rodrigue.
Yeah, we actually see this also on the drug side, where we've done adaptive design trials, a lot of them actually. We have a really great, strong statistics team here, and whenever we get a protocol, the first thing we do is send it to our stats team. They will look at it and dissect it and see if there's a different way, a better way of doing the stats analysis and putting that into the design of the trial. And that discussion is very important with the manufacturer and sponsor. They might not have thought of a certain way of doing it, and it could actually, as alluded to, make the timelines a bit faster as well. Because if we, let's say, don't need as many patients, enrollment numbers are what also drives the big part of the timelines of a study. So if you need, instead of 100, maybe you need 60 patients in the trial, that could be a big win for the timelines for the study.
Okay, great. Now I'll open the floor to anyone else as an attendee who wishes to ask any questions live. If I see your hand is raised, I will then open the microphone for you to ask the question. So is there any additional questions? No? Okay, so first of all, again, thank you so much for all the great information. I want to bring a couple more items on this topic. Number one is there was a consultation a couple of years ago around clinical trial modernization. And I know that Marie-Claude talked about some of the challenges we've had. And so industry did provide feedback. And in fact, MedTech Canada also reached out to Health Canada after that feedback and provided additional feedback. I looked online, and I'm actually going to put in the chat a link to that feedback. They also posted on the What We Heard. So I'm just putting in the chat for people to be able to read it themselves. And it just happened also in September. Also, there was published a red tape production. And also clinical trials were mentioned there. However, they really did focus on drugs, I believe. And so that's something that at MedTech Canada, we're going to be reaching out internally to Health Canada to see. I believe that they said first drugs and then the rest, but again, we want to make sure that medical devices definitely are up there. As Marie-Claude mentioned, there is less of a structure for medical device trials, so there is, I think, an increased need for them to focus on that. And so with that, at MedTech Canada, we're planning to form next year a committee focused on clinical trials around that area as well. Marie-Claude, you were talking about, again, some of those challenges. And is there anything that you're aware that industry has been doing maybe to self-help in those areas, like lack of guidances? Maybe there's international guidances that they've been using to support the lack of Canadian guidance. Any feedback on that area?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say Health Canada has been issued a notice indicating that they rely on the FDA guidances. So when we have the lack of guidances in Canada, we can go in the US and see if there is something specific issued. This is not for all type of devices, because we have plenty of new devices for sure that are not covered, but verify on a monthly basis if there is something new with the FDA in terms of guidance. And there is some pilot project with the FDA as well in Canada, because naturally we are a bit out of resources for even generate guidance, not only for the ITA, it's for all medical devices that we are that have a lot of guidances. So we should rely on the FDA for the moment, but we should at some point be a bit more with the other jurisdictions as well, not only with the US.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there's also, and I don't recall which one it was, but they had a consultation around, again, around the transparency around this portal that we would be able to submit and then
Yeah.
see, and they provided some examples. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think we're all looking forward to the outcome of
Yeah.
that evolution.
For the portal, this is already applicable for medical
Mm.
device license application with the REP, the regulatory enrollment process. This is not still up to date for the REP because it could be long to obtain the appropriate numbers from Medical Device Bureau to be able to enroll under the regulatory enrollment process. But to subscribe with the gateway, it's relatively easy to the FDA portal that we are using for submissions. For drug and devices, it's exactly the same portal. So this is already good. This is for licensing product, it's not so bad because people have some resources. It's easier. When we arrive with an institution, maybe they don't be able to submit via the portal. It's the same for drugs. We have both way to submit via the portal or via a non-ECTD format, via emails or via courier. So I believe it could be appropriate to maybe install that at some point for the sponsor to have the opportunity to submit in both way, depending the submission size or their capabilities.
Yeah, so yeah, on the portal, yeah, definitely looking forward to having that portal. eStar, REP, I know there's a lot of work around the submission part of it, but I believe also the part of that, maybe that original consultation, I have to kind of double check, but they also were talking about a portal for clinical trial submissions and transparency and what the user would see, et cetera. So definitely anything around that would be extremely helpful for our industry around transparency and be able just to just plan, right? To your point, Vatche, you were talking about, if someone
Yeah.
comes to you and they say, oh, we want to do it in 2 months, you're like, whoa, hold on a second. But that transparency would help also making industry understand and create reasonable timeframes as well.
Yes.
Without knowing and without published timelines, that also doesn't help us plan, the regulatory strategy, including clinical trials.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so let me see. I think maybe there's one more question here. Let me see. Yeah, there's another question. So from a regulatory perspective, how are invasive devices challenged differently than non-invasive devices in clinical trials? And what are the key differences in their approval pathways?
Okay.
So I think maybe we'll limit it to the clinical trial portion. I know the question around approval pathways, that's probably a different topic or scope that we can delve into maybe at another time. But please go ahead, Marie-Claude or Vatche.
Okay. So I will say it's not the end. It's classified by risk. So it's you may have invasive device in class 2 and a non-invasive device in class 3. So it's really by classification, and the requirement will be different between it's a class 2, 3, or 4. But the pathway is exactly the same. So the ITA process is the same. It's more the level of information that we have to provide it as part of the application, which will differ per se. In terms of invasiveness, we also need to be careful. Sometimes they are class 1. So it's really depending, and we have seen event situation when it's class 3 in the US and class 1 in Canada. So it's really not to follow regarding invasiveness. So it's really verify the classification. The keywords index of Health Canada is really helpful to confirm the classification of device. But the pathway remain the same. It's really by class that the information will change.
Thank you for that. And I know we are 2 minutes to the time. I do want to talk about the classification a bit, just because I know we mentioned also red tape reduction. So in the red tape reduction, there is a very short sentence around classification of medical devices. And also yesterday I was at a webinar that Bruce Randall was giving for the DIAC, which is Dental Association, talking about this. And what Health Canada is looking to put forward, and it's a process right now, so they don't want the industry to kind of like say, pick my product, but they're looking to find a pathway to be able to better react to global regulatory classifications. For example, to your point, you said, well, in the US it's a 1, in Canada it's a 3. COVID-19 tests are a perfect example within Canada as a 4, etc. So they're looking to create a new structure by which to put this process to do like special rules in a way. But outside of the Canada Gazette, because that's very clunky and very cumbersome and slow. So once that is put forward, we will be looking to provide feedback to Health Canada around those kind of devices that we want to see align with other global jurisdictions. And the benefit will be not only in the submission, but also in the clinical trials, for example, et cetera. So we definitely look forward to that evolution, and we're very happy to see that. And we will be supporting that from our membership perspective. But again, great wins in different areas around this red tape reduction, not only in submission, but also other pre-market functions such as clinical trials. So thank you so much for everybody that attended. Thank you so much for our speakers, Marie-Claude and Vatche. For those ones that are aware, there's a lot of work that happens behind to get this going and creating those slides and collaborating. So really appreciate your time. If anybody has questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, or again, Vatche and Marie-Claude have their emails there. We will send, as I said, the slides to everyone. We'll try to work on the recording for non-Medtech members. For Medtech members, you will receive a newsletter, and we also send a survey. So we seek to get feedback from you, the attendees and the speakers, around how we can improve this moving forward. And we look forward to other such topics around clinical trials in the future in Medtech Canada. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. And hopefully you were able to eat your lunch or are going to go eat your lunch. So enjoy your lunch. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mia.
Bye.
Thank you, Vatche.
Bye.
Bye.